So much of what we receive by way of information is mediated. What we learn comes to us through the filter of a newspaper writer, editor, and publisher, a radio announcer, editor, and producer, or a television reporter, anchor, editor, and producer. Those are all of the filters that something has to go through before it reaches you and me. What reaches us is what several other people have decided we should know. Media begin oftentimes with a determined storyline. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way stories are produced. But the storyline or theme of an article becomes the norm of selectivity for what goes into the article. We need to have access to the rest of the story if we're ever going to make a judgment about that story. Most stories are inconsequential, but sometimes they touch the very core of who we are. The recent discussion around the same-sex marriage legislation introduced and passed in the District of Columbia is a perfect example of news media crossing the line from fact to spin in such a way that it created a fog around the issue, a fog of misinformation. The real story was the clash of rights. The newly created right to a newly defined definition of marriage needed to be balanced with the long-standing right of conscience that has traditionally been protected by religious exemption. But the media never covered the real story. Where do we go? Where do we go for the rest of the story? Where do we go to find the rest of the story? One more example of just how the principle of selectivity can so taint the story that when you walk away from it, you really don't have the facts. The New York Times, not too long ago, ran a very long story in defense of embryonic stem cell research. This was not an opinion piece. This was a news story that covered the opening story on the front page and an entire page inside. The story carefully avoided the distinction between embryonic and adult stem cell research, one of which is moral and the other immoral. The paper then proceeded to attribute to embryonic stem cell research the benefits that have so far been derived only from adult stem cell research. For a person unaware of the distinctions and the facts, the New York Times myth became a reality. The need for us to know the rest of the story. So much of what we and our neighbors in the nation know about our Catholic Church is mediated through the lens of others, many of whom simply don't know the story.